The rain didn't wash away the blood. It just spread it out, turning the cracked asphalt into a dull, rusty mirror. Her husband's taillights faded into the fog, taking a decade of apologies and broken promises with them. She was supposed to die there, a forgotten inconvenience in the city's gutter. Instead, a heavy black sedan rolled to a stop by her broken body. A man stepped out, a man the entire city feared. He didn't offer pity. He offered a crown. The concrete was freezing. That was Nora's first coherent thought as the ringing in her ears subsided. It wasn't the searing pain in her ribs or the thick metallic taste pooling behind her teeth. It was the absolute, unforgiving cold of the alleyway, biting through her thin cotton dress. A few feet away, Gregory's tires squealed. The sound bounced off the brick walls of the meatpacking district, harsh and final. He hadn't even checked if she was breathing. He just took his coat, kicked her squarely in the side, and got in his car. She watched the red taillights bleed into the mist until they vanished entirely. Nora didn't try to get up. She knew her body well enough by now to understand the inventory of her injuries. Her right eye was swelling shut. At least 2 ribs were cracked. Her lip was split wide. Gregory had been losing at the tables again. He always hit harder when he lost money to men he considered his inferiors. Tonight it had been a game over on 4th Street, a dirty basement smelling of cheap cigars and desperation. When they stepped outside into the drizzle, his frustration had boiled over. She had simply asked if they had enough left for the rent. That was the trigger. She lay perfectly still, listening to the rain hit the pavement. It was quiet, peaceful in a morbid sort of way. For the first time in 6 years, nobody was yelling at her. Nobody was telling her she was useless, a burden, a mistake. If she closed her eyes, she could just let the cold seep into her bones until everything went dark. A heavy rhythmic hum broke the silence. The low vibration of a massive engine crept up the alley. Nora opened her good eye. A pair of headlights cut through the fog, blindingly bright, moving at a glacial pace. The car was black armor-plated by the look of its heavy frame, and it stopped exactly 3 feet from where her hand lay, splayed on the wet gravel. The engine idled. The rain continued to fall. Nora didn't move. If it was one of Gregory's creditors coming to collect, they could have her. She had nothing left to give. The rear door opened with a heavy, solid thud. A man stepped out. He didn't rush. There was no frantic scramble to check on the bleeding woman in the street. His footsteps were measured the sound of expensive leather soles scraping against the grit. He wore a dark wool overcoat that absorbed the dim streetlights, his hands resting casually in his pockets. Gabriel Rossi looked down at her. Nora knew who he was. Everyone in this district knew Gabriel Rossi. You didn't survive in the city without learning the faces of the men who owned it. He wasn't a street thug. He didn't run corner games or peddle cheap drugs. He controlled the ports, the unions, the judges. He was a man of quiet, absolute violence. "Gregory's wife," Gabriel said. His voice was flat, carrying perfectly over the sound of the rain. It wasn't a question. Nora swallowed the blood in her mouth. She tried to push herself up onto her elbows, but her right arm gave out. She collapsed back against the asphalt with a sharp hiss of breath. "Ex-wife," she managed to croak. Her voice sounded like crushed glass. Gabriel tilted his head a fraction. He stepped closer, the toe of his polished shoe stopping an inch from her bruised cheek. He looked at her the way a man might appraise a structural collapse, calculating the damage, determining if it was worth rebuilding. "He left you here." "Seems that way." Nora coughed a wet, rattling sound. "If you're looking for him, you missed him. Try the bars on 9th. I know exactly where Gregory is," Gabriel said softly. "My men are already waiting for him. He owes me $500,000. I came to see what he left behind, as collateral." Nora let out a dry, humorless laugh that immediately turned into a grimace of pain. "I'm not worth $100, Rossi. You're out of luck." Gabriel crouched down. Up close, his face was hard, the angles sharp and unforgiving. His dark eyes locked onto hers. He didn't see a victim. He was looking for a flicker of life, a reason to care. A man who leaves his wife bleeding in the street to save his own skin is a dead man anyway. The debt is secondary. He reached out. For a second, Nora flinched, bracing for a strike. The instinct was baked into her muscles. But Gabriel's hand didn't strike. He grabbed the lapel of his own overcoat, shrugged it off his shoulders, and draped the heavy, warm wool over her shivering body. "Are you going to die here?" he asked, his tone entirely conversational. "Probably." "Do you want to—" Nora looked up at him. The rain ran down his face, but he didn't seem to notice. The cynicism in her chest fought with a primal, deeply buried instinct to survive. She was tired of hurting. But more than that, looking at the indifferent cruelty of the city around her, she was suddenly furious. She was furious at Gregory. She was furious at the pavement. She was furious at the fact that her life amounted to collateral for a degenerate gambler. "No," Nora whispered. Gabriel held out his hand. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell her it was going to be all right. He just offered a way off the ground. Nora stared at his palm. It was calloused, scarred, the hand of a man who dealt in death. She pushed through the agony in her ribs, lifted a shaking, blood-stained arm and grabbed his hand. His grip was like iron. He hauled her to her feet with shocking ease. Her legs buckled instantly, but Gabriel caught her wrapping an arm around her waist, taking her weight against his side. "Get in the car," he said. The interior of the sedan smelled of rich leather, expensive scotch and gunpowder. Nora slumped against the far door, clutching Gabriel's wool coat around her shoulders like a shield. She was shivering uncontrollably now, the adrenaline draining from her system to leave nothing but profound, agonizing shock. Gabriel sat opposite her, separated by the wide console. He didn't look at her. He was typing a message on a sleek, black phone, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. The privacy partition between them and the driver was raised. It was perfectly silent inside the cabin, the heavy armor blocking out the noise of the city entirely. "Where are you taking me?" Nora asked. Every word required a conscious effort. "Somewhere you won't bleed on a public sidewalk," Gabriel replied without looking up. "My doctor is waiting." "I don't have money for a doctor." "I didn't ask you to pay." He pressed send and finally put the phone away, shifting his gaze to her. "You need stitches. Your ribs are fractured. You'll likely have a concussion. Dr. Aris will fix it. After that, we talk." Nora closed her eyes. The gentle sway of the car was making her nauseous. "Why?" she asked. "Why bother? You said it yourself. I'm worthless as collateral." "You misunderstood," Gabriel said. His voice was calm, a low baritone that commanded the small space. "I didn't say you were worthless. I said I came to see what he left behind. Gregory is a fool. Fools discard things of value because they don't know how to use them." "I'm not a thing to be used. Everyone is used, Nora. The only choice you have in this world is who uses you and what you get in return." She didn't have the energy to argue philosophy with a mob boss. She let her head fall back against the tinted window. 10 minutes later, the car turned into a private gated driveway. Heavy iron gates swung open, revealing a sprawling stone estate hidden behind high, ivy-covered walls right on the edge of the city limits. The car stopped. The driver opened Nora's door before she could even reach for the handle. Gabriel stepped out from the other side. He walked around the rear of the vehicle, gesturing for her to follow. When she stumbled on the first step, her vision whiting out from the pain in her side, Gabriel was there. He didn't carry her. He recognized the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she fought to stay upright. Instead, he gripped her elbow, providing an anchor. He led her through a side entrance, down a dimly lit hallway, paneled in dark oak, and into a room that looked like a cross between a high-end study and a trauma ward. A stainless steel table sat in the center, under bright surgical lights, surrounded by glass cabinets full of medical supplies. An older man with graying hair and rolled-up sleeves was washing his hands at a deep sink. Dr. Orris. He turned, drying his hands on a towel, his eyes sweeping over Nora with professional detachment. "Put her on the table," Aris said, his voice clipped. Gabriel guided her to the edge. Nora sat clutching the coat. She felt incredibly exposed, a stray dog brought into a purebred kennel. "Take the coat off," the doctor instructed. "I need to see the damage." Nora hesitated. She looked at Gabriel. He stood near the door, his arms crossed, watching her. He didn't leave. He didn't look away. "He stays," Gabriel said, answering her unspoken question. "I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Nora ground her teeth. She let the heavy coat slip off her shoulders. Beneath it, her dress was torn at the collar, soaked in muddy water and blood. The harsh lights illuminated the mosaic of bruises on her arms and chest. Some were fresh, angry red and purple. Others were fading yellow, the history of a marriage written on her skin. Dr. Orris stepped forward, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. He was gentle, but thorough. He checked her pupils with a penlight felt along her jawline, and then pressed 2 fingers lightly against her ribs. Nora gasped, arching away from the touch. 3 fractured ribs. Aris noted, speaking to Gabriel rather than her. Slight concussion. The laceration on the brow needs 6 stitches. The split lip will heal on its own. She's malnourished and exhausted. She needs rest binding for the ribs and heavy antibiotics to prevent infection from whatever was on that street. "Do it," Gabriel commanded. For the next 30 minutes, Nora endured the sting of local anesthetic and the tug of a needle closing the skin above her eye. She focused on a spot on the wall, refusing to make a sound. She would not cry in front of these men. She had cried enough for Gregory. She wouldn't waste tears on Gabriel Rossi. When it was done, Dr. Aris wrapped her ribs tightly in thick bandages, handing her a pair of loose, clean grey sweatpants and a dark t-shirt. "Put these on. There's a bathroom through that door. Then take these pills." He set 2 white tablets and a glass of water on the steel counter. Nora took the clothes and vanished into the bathroom. She stripped off the ruined dress, dropping it into the trash can. She caught sight of herself in the mirror over the sink. She looked like a corpse. Her eye was a swollen mass of black and blue, a neat row of black thread cutting through her eyebrow. Her skin was pale, her hair matted with dried blood. She washed her face with a warm washcloth, the water running pink down the drain. She dressed carefully, the clean clothes feeling alien against her battered skin. When she walked back out, Dr. Aris was gone. Gabriel was sitting in a leather armchair in the corner of the room, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked up as she entered. "Sit." He pointed to the chair opposite him. Nora walked over stiffly and sat down. She picked up the pills and swallowed them dry, ignoring the water. "You didn't scream," Gabriel observed, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Aris isn't known for his gentle touch." "I've had worse," Nora said flatly. "I know." Gabriel set his glass down. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Gregory is currently tied to a chair in a warehouse near the docks. He cried the moment my men grabbed him. He offered to sell you to them to cover a fraction of his debt." Nora felt a cold spike of disgust, but no surprise. "Like I said, he's a coward." "He is." Gabriel held her gaze. The intensity in his dark eyes was suffocating. "I'm going to kill him, Nora. But before I do, I need to know what you want." Nora froze. She stared at the man across from her. He was offering her the life of her husband. No hesitation, no moral grandstanding, just a simple transaction of power. She realized then the true danger of Gabriel Rossi. Gregory broke her body, but this man had the power to reshape her entirely. "I want," Nora started her voice, finally steady, "to never be put on the pavement again." Gabriel's mouth curved into a faint, dangerous approximation of a smile. "Done. Welcome to the family." Waking up was a slow, agonizing process of inventory. First the dull throb in Nora's temple, then the sharp, restrictive bite of the bandages wrapping her ribs with every shallow breath. Finally, the texture of the sheets. They were heavy, crisp cotton. They smelled of cedar and clean laundry. It was the smell of safety, a luxury she hadn't known in 6 years. Nora forced her good eye open. The room was massive, painted in muted greys and deep blues. Floor-to-ceiling windows were covered by thick blackout curtains, letting in only a sliver of pale morning light. She lay in the center of a king-sized bed, wearing the oversized clothes Dr. Aris had provided. She didn't move immediately. Her survival instinct, honed over years of navigating a volatile household, demanded she map the exits first. A heavy oak door to her left, a cracked door leading to a bathroom on her right. No sound. No heavy drunken snoring. No smell of stale beer and failure. The door to the hallway clicked open. Nora's muscles locked, her breath catching in her throat. A young man stepped in. He wasn't Gabriel. He was younger, perhaps in his late 20s, with sharp cheekbones and a tailored dark suit that hid the bulk of a shoulder holster. He carried a silver tray with a plain ceramic mug of black coffee and a small folded newspaper. He paused when he saw her awake, his face carefully blank. "Good morning, Mrs. Rossi." Nora stared at him, her pulse jumping. "My last name is Miller. Gregory's name." "Who are you?" "My name is Leo," he said, stepping forward to place the tray on the mahogany nightstand. "And as of 2 hours ago, Gregory Miller ceases to be a relevant variable in this city." The boss handled the paperwork. "You are a guest of Gabriel Rossi. Therefore, in this house, you have his protection. People will address you with the respect that affords." Leo didn't linger. He gave a brief, stiff nod and exited, pulling the heavy door shut until the latch clicked tight. Nora pushed herself up. The pain was immediate, a hot spike radiating from her side, but she gritted her teeth and swung her legs over the edge of the mattress. Her bare feet hit the plush rug. She reached for the coffee. It was scalding hot and completely black, just the way she drank it to stay awake during the double shifts she used to work to cover Gregory's debts. Beside the mug was a small manila envelope resting on top of the newspaper. Nora set the mug down. Her hands were shaking slightly. She picked up the envelope and tipped it over. A heavy gold band fell out, clattering loudly against the wood of the nightstand. Gregory's wedding ring. It was scuffed and dirty, a cheap piece of metal that had spent more time sitting on the green felt of poker tables than on his finger. There was a dark, reddish-brown smear on the inner curve of the band. Dried blood. Nora stared at it. She didn't feel a rush of grief. She didn't feel relief either. What she felt was a hollow, echoing emptiness. The man who had terrorized her, who had systematically dismantled her confidence and broken her bones, was gone. Erased by a man she had met less than 12 hours ago. The speed of the violence was terrifying. The door opened again. This time it was Gabriel. He had changed his clothes. He wore dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to expose forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. He looked rested. Killing Gregory hadn't cost him a minute of sleep. He walked to the foot of the bed, his dark eyes taking in her upright posture, the coffee mug in her hand, and the ring sitting on the table. "Aris said you should be flat on your back for another day," Gabriel noted. "If I stay in bed, my muscles will seize up," Nora replied. Her voice was raspy, but steadier than the night before. "I heal better when I move. You've had practice." It wasn't a question. Plenty. Nora pointed a trembling finger at the gold band. "Is it done? His debts are cleared," Gabriel said smoothly. "His creditors have been informed he relocated permanently. His landlord was paid through the end of the month, and his apartment is being cleared out. You don't have to look over your shoulder, Nora. He will never touch you again." Nora picked up the ring. It felt cold. She walked past Gabriel, her steps slow and deliberate, toward the small trash can tucked under the desk in the corner. She dropped the ring inside. It hit the plastic bottom with a hollow thud. Gabriel watched her, his expression unreadable. "No tears for the widow. He died the moment he kicked me in that alley," Nora said, turning to face him. She leaned against the desk to take the weight off her ribs. "What happens now, Gabriel?" "You bought my life. You paid his debt. What do you expect me to do to work it off? You don't work it off." Gabriel stepped closer. He didn't invade her space, stopping a polite distance away, but his presence was heavy gravitational. "You are not a servant. You are not a prisoner. But you are marked by my intervention. If you walk out those gates and go back to a diner in the city, my enemies will use you to get to me. You are a vulnerability I cannot afford to leave unguarded. So I stay here." "You stay here," Gabriel confirmed. "You heal. You learn how this house operates. You learn who works for me and who smiles at me while holding a knife. Gregory taught you how to survive a beating. I'm going to teach you how to make sure nobody ever raises a hand to you in the first place." Nora looked into his eyes. There was no warmth there, but there was an absolute, unbreakable certainty. He wasn't saving a damsel in distress. He was forging a weapon. "Okay," Nora whispered. "Teach me." 3 weeks passed. The bruising on Nora's face faded from a violent purple to a sickly yellow, and finally to a pale shadow under her eye. Dr. Aris removed the stitches, leaving a thin silver scar slicing through the tail of her right eyebrow. It made her look harder. Less like a victim, more like a survivor. Gabriel's estate was a fortress disguised as a manor. There were guards on the perimeter cameras in the hallways, and a constant quiet hum of machinery keeping the outside world at bay. Nora was given free rein of the house, though Leo was never more than a room away. She spent her days in the library, a massive room smelling of old paper and leather bindings. Gabriel worked there, often sitting behind a heavy mahogany desk, reviewing ledgers and meeting with his captains. He never asked her to leave when his men arrived. He let her sit in the wingback chair by the fireplace, reading a book, acting as a piece of the furniture. It was a test. Nora knew it. Gabriel was waiting to see if she would break under the tension, if the proximity to violent men would send her into a panic. It didn't. Living with Gregory had been a masterclass in reading the microscopic shifts in a man's demeanor. She knew the sound a boot made when a man was agitated. She knew the way a liar's breathing turned shallow. She recognized the rigid posture of someone holding back anger. Gabriel's men were polished, wearing expensive suits and gold watches, but underneath they were just like Gregory. They were driven by greed, fear, and pride. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Gabriel was meeting with Dominic, one of his lieutenants, who oversaw the southern shipping docks. Dominic was a large, boisterous man, with a thick beard and a booming laugh. He stood in front of Gabriel's desk, handing over a stack of manifests. Nora sat by the fire, a novel resting open on her lap. She wasn't reading. "Shipments are light this month, boss," Dominic said, gesturing to the papers. "The harbour master is cracking down on inspections. We had to reroute 3 containers through the northern port, cost us a premium in bribes. The numbers are down, but it's the cost of doing business safely." Gabriel flipped through the pages. His face gave nothing away. "The northern port is run by the Russians. You paid their tariff." "Had to." Dominic sighed heavily. "Better than losing the cargo to the feds." Gabriel nodded slowly. "Fine. Keep me updated. If the harbour master becomes a permanent issue, we'll need to find a replacement for him." Dominic grinned, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "I'll keep my ear to the ground. Have a good evening, boss." He glanced toward the fireplace, giving Nora a dismissive, patronizing nod, and walked out. The door clicked shut. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the rain lashing against the glass. Gabriel tossed the manifests onto the desk and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "He's skimming," Nora said quietly. Gabriel stopped rubbing his temples. He opened his eyes and looked at her. He didn't look surprised, just intensely focused. "Excuse me." Nora closed her book and set it on the side table. She stood up her ribs, aching only a dull bit now, and walked over to the desk. "Dominic, he's stealing from you." Gabriel steepled his fingers. "Dominic has been with my family for 15 years. He brings in 20% of my total revenue. What makes you think he's skimming?" "Because he sounded exactly like Gregory when he was hiding gambling losses," Nora said. She rested her hands on the edge of Gabriel's desk. "When a man tells you bad news he can't control, he looks you in the eye because he wants you to see his frustration. He wants you to know he's on your side." Dominic didn't look at you. He looked at the paperwork. He blamed the harbour master, a faceless enemy, to justify a drop in revenue. Gabriel remained silent, listening. "And his hands," Nora continued. "He adjusted his cuffs right after he lied about paying the Russians. It's a self-soothing gesture. Men do it when their adrenaline spikes. He didn't pay a tariff to the Russians, Gabriel. He kept the money and blamed a phantom bribe." Gabriel looked down at the manifests, then back up at Nora. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. It was a terrifying expression on a man so accustomed to violence. "You're very observant," Gabriel murmured. "I had to be. It kept me alive." Gabriel stood up. He walked around the desk until he was standing inches from her. The height difference forced Nora to tilt her head back, but she didn't step away. She held her ground. "If you're wrong," Gabriel said softly, "Dominic will take it as a profound insult. He will demand blood for the accusation. My men are fiercely protective of their honor. I'm not wrong." Nora's voice was like steel. "Check the northern port logs. Ask your contacts in the Russian syndicate if they saw those 3 containers. They didn't." Gabriel stared down at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number, keeping his eyes locked on Nora's. "Leo," Gabriel said into the receiver. "Pull Dominic's personal banking records for the last 6 months. Track his wife's accounts, too. I want to know exactly how much he lost at the tables, and I want to know if he rerouted anything through the North Port this week." He hung up, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "If you're right," Gabriel said, leaning down slightly so his breath brushed her ear, "you just made yourself an enemy of one of the most dangerous men in my outfit." Nora didn't flinch. She turned her head slightly, meeting his dark, predatory gaze. "If I'm right, he won't be in your outfit much longer." "Will he?" Gabriel let out a low, rough chuckle. He reached up his knuckles, gently grazing the edge of the silver scar on her eyebrow. The touch was entirely devoid of violence, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. "No," Gabriel whispered. "He won't. It took exactly 48 hours to verify the accusation. Nora spent those 2 days in the library, tracing lines of ink in old ledgers, ignoring the heavy tension radiating through the manor. She knew what she had done. She had pulled a thread on a very dark, very violent tapestry. On Thursday evening, the heavy oak doors of the library swung open. Leo stepped inside, his face as unreadable as ever. He walked directly to Gabriel's desk and placed a thin manila folder on the polished wood. Gabriel opened it. He read the single sheet of paper inside his eyes, tracking the text with robotic precision. Then he closed the folder. The silence in the room stretched, pulling taut until it felt like it might snap. "Leo," Gabriel said softly. "Where is he?" "Waiting at the shipyard. Pier 41. He thinks it's a standard quarterly review. Prep the car." Gabriel stood. He adjusted his cuffs, a ghost of a gesture that felt entirely different from Dominic's nervous habit. This was preparation for work. Leo nodded and left the room. Gabriel turned his attention to the fireplace, where Nora sat, frozen in the wingback chair. The book in her lap was suddenly heavy. "Get your coat," Gabriel ordered. Nora didn't ask questions. She placed the book down her movements, stiff. She retrieved the heavy wool overcoat Gabriel had draped over her. In the alley it had been dry cleaned, but she still felt the ghost of the rain in its fibers. She slipped it on and followed him out into the cold night. The drive to the shipyard was suffocating. The armor-plated sedan glided through the slick streets, the city lights smearing against the tinted glass. Gabriel didn't speak. He stared out the window, his profile carved from granite. Nora focused on her breathing. She was stepping out of the theoretical violence of ledgers and into the physical reality of Gabriel's world. Pier 41 was a sprawling, desolate stretch of concrete lined with towering metal shipping containers. The salt air was thick, carrying the smell of rust-dead fish and diesel exhaust. The sedan pulled to a halt near the edge of the water. Gabriel stepped out. Nora followed, shivering, as the damp wind whipped her hair across her face. Dominic was waiting near the edge of the dock, flanked by 2 of his own men. He wore a heavy leather jacket, a cigar clamped between his teeth. He smiled broadly when he saw Gabriel, but the smile faltered slightly when he noticed Nora stepping out of the shadows behind him. "Boss," Dominic called out over the sound of the crashing waves. "A bit cold for a stroll, isn't it? And you brought company." Gabriel didn't smile. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked until he was 10 feet away from his lieutenant. "You owed the Russians $400,000, Dominic. A gambling debt. You settled it Tuesday morning." The color drained from Dominic's face. The cigar dropped from his teeth, landing on the wet concrete with a faint hiss. His 2 guards shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden lethal drop in atmospheric pressure. Behind Gabriel, Leo unbuttoned his suit jacket, resting his hand casually near his ribs. "Gabriel, listen to me." Dominic started, his voice cracking. He raised his hands, palms out. "It was a temporary loan. The tables were hot. I got in over my head. I was going to pay the family back. I swear to God." "You lied to my face," Gabriel said. The flatness of his tone was terrifying. "You blamed the harbor master. You created a fictional enemy to cover your own theft. If you had come to me, I would have paid your debt and broken your legs. Because you lied, you forced me to look at you as a liability." Dominic's eyes darted frantically. They landed on Nora. Recognition flashed in his face, followed by a violent, ugly sneer. "Her. That gutter trash you picked up. She read my books. You let a degenerate's wife audit me." Dominic lunged forward, pure rage overriding his survival instinct. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just wanted to get his hands on the woman who had unraveled him. He didn't make it 2 steps. The gunshot was deafening. It echoed off the steel containers, a sharp, concussive crack that rattled Nora's teeth. Dominic stopped. His eyes went wide, staring blankly at Gabriel's chest. Then his knees buckled. He hit the concrete heavily, a dark pool, rapidly expanding beneath him, mixing with the puddles of dirty salt water. Gabriel lowered the matte black pistol. He hadn't even blinked. His hand was entirely steady. He looked at Dominic's two guards. They were frozen, their hands raised high in the air, terrified to even breathe. "Clean this up," Gabriel told them. "If a single dollar is missing from the southern docks by tomorrow morning, you will join him." Gabriel turned around. He looked at Nora. She stood perfectly still. Her ears were ringing loudly, her heart hammering against her healing ribs. She stared at the dead man on the ground. She had never seen a man die before. She expected to feel horror. She expected to vomit. Instead, she felt a cold, sharp clarity. Dominic would have killed her just now. He would have snapped her neck without a second thought. Gabriel had eliminated the threat. It was brutal, it was ugly, but it was absolute. She looked up at Gabriel. The wind tore at his dark hair, the gun still resting casually at his side. He was waiting for her to break. He was waiting for the fragile, battered woman from the alley to resurface and run from the monster. Nora met his gaze. She didn't shrink away. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, ignoring the blood creeping toward her shoes. "The northern port needs a new liaison," Nora said, her voice cutting through the ringing silence. "The Russians will want to renegotiate now that Dominic is gone." Gabriel stared at her. Slowly, the coldness in his eyes dissolved into something entirely different. It was a dark, consuming heat. He holstered the weapon, reached out, and pulled the collar of her coat tighter against the wind. "We'll review the files in the morning," Gabriel said. The library felt different the next day. It was no longer just a room where Nora sought refuge. It had become a war room. She sat at the mahogany table, surrounded by ledgers, shipping manifests, and banking statements. She had spent the entire morning untangling the mess Dominic had left behind. The numbers spoke to her in a way people never did. They didn't lie. They didn't hit. They just required patience to understand. Gabriel entered the room just after noon. He didn't go to his desk. He pulled up a chair next to Nora, leaning over her shoulder to look at the open ledger. He smelled of rain and black coffee. "It's worse than we thought," Nora murmured, tapping a line of red ink with her pen. He wasn't just skimming from the shipping crates. He was inflating the payroll for the warehouse staff, ghost employees. He's been draining this account for 8 months. Total loss. Gabriel asked, his voice, a low rumble right next to her ear. A little over $1 million. She turned her head to look at him. They were inches apart. "I can recover about 40% of it. He bought property under his wife's maiden name. Liquidate those and it plugs the immediate hole in the operational budget." Gabriel studied her face, the fading scar on her eyebrow, the sharp, intelligent focus in her eyes. "You don't flinch anymore when I stand this close. I know you aren't going to hit me, Gabriel. I'm a killer, Nora. You saw that last night. You kill for a reason. Gregory hit me because his steak was cold, or because it rained, or because he hated himself." Nora set the pen down. Violence with a purpose is just strategy. Senseless violence is what makes a monster. Gabriel reached out. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, but the gesture was shockingly tender. "Tonight the captains are coming to the house, all 6 of them. They know Dominic is gone. They will be hungry, looking to see who gets his territory. They will test the waters. They will test me. Who are you giving it to?" "I'm not giving it to any of them," Gabriel said. "I'm giving it to you." Nora's breath hitched. She stared at him, searching for the punchline, but his face was dead serious. "Gabriel, I'm a woman. I was a waitress 3 weeks ago. They will laugh you out of the room. Let them try." He stood up, towering over the table. "You found a rat they all missed. You understand the numbers better than men who have been doing this for 20 years. They don't need to like you, Nora. They just need to respect my authority. And my authority says you run the southern docks." The dinner took place in the grand dining room. The table was vast, made of dark, polished walnut, illuminated by a heavy crystal chandelier. 6 men sat around the table. They were hard men, scarred and cynical, wearing expensive suits that didn't quite hide the brute force beneath them. Gabriel sat at the head of the table. To his right in the seat, traditionally held by the highest-ranking lieutenant, Dominic's old seat, sat Nora. She wore a dark, tailored dress Gabriel had ordered for her. It was high-necked, long-sleeved, and severe. She wore no jewelry. She didn't need it. The tension in the room was suffocating. The men ate their steaks in near silence, casting sideways glances at the woman sitting in the seat of power. Finally, Victor, a lean, sharp-eyed man who ran the extortion rackets downtown, pushed his plate away and wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "Boss," Victor began, his voice gravelly, "with respect to the dead, Dominic's territory is bleeding. The men are restless. The Russians are asking questions. We need to appoint a successor quickly. I have 2 boys ready to step up." Gabriel took a sip of his red wine. He set the glass down deliberately. "The territory is already filled." Victor frowned. The other men exchanged confused looks. "Who? Nora will be managing the southern ports effective immediately," Gabriel stated. His voice was calm, but it carried an undeniable finality. The room exploded into a chorus of grunts and protests. "A woman? She's Gregory's leftover baggage, boss, come on." "The dock workers won't take orders from a skirt." Gabriel didn't raise his hand to silence them. He didn't have to. He simply shifted his gaze, sweeping it slowly across the faces of his captains. One by one, the men fell silent, the oppressive weight of Gabriel's stare crushing their objections. "Nora found Dominic's theft," Gabriel said softly. "She did it by reading a single quarterly report. She saved this family $1 million. What have any of you done this week besides complain about the feds?" Victor swallowed hard, but his pride wouldn't let it go completely. He turned his sharp eyes to Nora. "No disrespect, sweetheart. Finding a math error is cute. But dealing with the Russians, dealing with union bosses, it requires teeth." Nora didn't look at Gabriel for permission. She leaned forward, placing her elbows on the polished walnut. She looked directly into Victor's eyes, her face a mask of absolute calm. "I don't need teeth, Victor, when I hold the purse strings," Nora said. Her voice was smooth, carrying effortlessly down the long table. "The union bosses will listen to me, because if they don't, I will cut their pension fund contributions by 20%, which I can do legally under the loophole in Section 4 of their new contract. The Russians will deal with me, because I am willing to lower their tariff by 0.5% in exchange for exclusive use of Pier 41. She paused, letting the silence ring out. She saw the shock register on Victor's face. She knew the contracts better than he did. "I am not here to be your friend," Nora continued, her eyes sweeping the room, locking with every single captain. "I am not here to serve you drinks. I am here to make sure this family operates at maximum efficiency. If you have a problem with my math, you can bring it to me. If you have a problem with my authority," she gestured casually to the head of the table, "you can take it up with the man who killed Dominic." Nobody spoke. The captain stared at her, the reality of the situation settling in. She wasn't a pet. She wasn't a charity case. She was a weapon Gabriel had unsheathed in the middle of his own house. Victor slowly picked up his glass of wine. He looked at Gabriel, then at Nora. He tilted the glass toward her. "To maximum efficiency, Mrs. Rossi," Victor muttered. Nora didn't correct his use of the name. She picked up her own glass. She had survived the pavement. She had survived the fire. Now she was ready to rule. The southern docks at 5 in the morning smelled of raw diesel dead fish and iron. The fog rolling off the Atlantic was thick enough to chew. Nora stood at the edge of Pier 41, the collar of her black wool coat turned up against the biting wind. The concrete beneath her boots was slick with oily rainwater. She didn't shiver. She hadn't shivered since the night Gabriel pulled her from the asphalt. Leo stood 4 feet behind her, a silent, heavily armed shadow. 50 yards away, a black SUV rolled through the security gate. It didn't bother with headlights. The vehicle coasted to a stop near a towering stack of rusted shipping containers. 4 men got out. 3 were muscle-broad-shouldered and wearing cheap leather. The 4th was Alexei. Alexei ran the local Bratva syndicate's smuggling routes. He was a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a neck thick with faded prison tattoos. He walked toward Nora with a slow, rolling gait, his boots splashing carelessly through the puddles. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at her with undisguised amusement. He didn't look at Leo. "Rossi sends a girl to do a man's business," Alexei said. His English was heavily accented, his voice a low, grinding rumble. "I heard the rumors. I didn't believe Gabriel was losing his mind. Where is Dominic?" "Dominic was caught stealing. Gabriel shot him," Nora said flatly. "I manage the port now." Alexei threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. His men chuckled behind him. "You a little bird in a big coat." "Listen to me, sweetheart. Dominic and I had an arrangement. We paid a flat rate. 15,000 a month. We move what we want when we want. I am not negotiating with the secretary." Nora didn't blink. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single sheet of folded paper. She held it out. Alexei stopped laughing. He didn't take the paper. Container 884, Bravo. Nora read aloud, her voice carrying easily over the sound of the crashing waves. Manifest says agricultural machinery. Actual cargo is military-grade optics, stolen from a supply depot in Maryland. Container 912 Alpha. Manifest says textiles. Actual cargo is uncut heroin. Alexei's jaw tightened. The amusement vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, reptilian stare. "Dominic charged you 15,000 a month because he was an idiot." Nora continued folding the paper and slipping it back into her pocket. "He let you run high-risk federal contraband through our port for pennies. If the DEA raids this dock, Gabriel loses millions in legitimate shipping revenue. You are a massive liability, Alexei." The Russian took a step forward. He was close enough now that Nora could smell the stale vodka and tobacco on his breath. He towered over her deliberately, trying to use his sheer physical mass to force her to step back. It was the same tactic Gregory used when he was drunk. Loom. Threaten. Suffocate. Nora held her ground. She tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "Here is the new arrangement," Nora said. Her voice didn't waver. "You pay 8% of the gross street value of whatever is in your containers. I have the Port Authority logs. I know exactly what you move. If you lie to me about the cargo, I will tip off the Coast Guard, and they will seize your shipment before it hits the breakwater. If you refuse the rate, you can try moving your product through the northern port, but I happen to know the unions up there are striking next week." Alexei's eyes narrowed. "You have a lot of nerve, little bird." He leaned in closer, his voice, dropping to a whisper, meant only for her. "I could snap your neck before your bodyguard even clears his holster. You could—" Nora agreed softly. "But then Gabriel Rossi would burn your operation to the ground. He wouldn't just kill you, Alexei. He would kill your brothers in Brighton Beach. He would kill the men you report to in St. Petersburg. You would start a war that would erase your family name from the earth. Over 8%. Alexei stared at her. He was looking for fear. He was looking for the trembling victim he expected. He found nothing but absolute, freezing certainty. She wasn't bluffing. She was presenting an equation, and she had already calculated the outcome. Slowly the Russian leaned back. He cracked his knuckles, a loud popping sound in the damp air. 8% is robbery. It's the cost of doing business safely, Nora corrected. Wire the first payment by noon tomorrow, or don't bring your ships to my dock. She turned her back on him. It was a calculated risk, a deliberate display of disrespect to cement her dominance. She walked away, her boot heels clicking sharply against the concrete. Leo fell into step behind her. They reached the armored sedan, parked near the administrative building. The rear door opened from the inside. Gabriel was sitting in the back, shrouded in the shadows of the cabin. Nora climbed in. The heat of the car washed over her, and for a fraction of a second, her hands shook. She clenched them into fists, forcing the adrenaline down. He agreed, Gabriel asked, handing her a thermos of hot coffee. He'll pay, Nora said. She took the thermos, unscrewed the cap, and drank. The coffee burned her throat in the best possible way. He didn't like it, but he respected the math. And he respects you. Gabriel looked at her profile in the dim light. He respected you, Nora. You didn't flinch when he crowded you. Men like him only understand leverage. I had it. He didn't. She turned to face him. The southern docks are secure. Gabriel reached across the console. He took her hand, prying her clenched fist open, his thumb tracing the pale skin of her palm. I knew they would be. 3 months passed. The transition of power was brutal, but efficient. Nora cleaned out the rot Dominic had left behind. She fired 2 foremen, renegotiated with the unions, and doubled the family's profit margin on the southern docks. The captains stopped calling her sweetheart. They started calling her Mom. It was late November. The first snow of the year was falling, dusting the sprawling grounds of Gabriel's estate in a layer of pristine white. Inside the library, the fire was roaring. Nora sat on the plush leather sofa, her stockinged feet tucked beneath her. She was reviewing a stack of offshore banking statements. Gabriel stood by the crystal decanters on the far wall, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. He wore a dark Henley shirt, the sleeves pushed up, looking less like a Mafia Boss and more like a man exhausted by the weight of his own empire. He walked over and handed her a glass. He didn't return to his desk. He sat down next to her on the sofa. Put the papers away, Gabriel said gently. It's past midnight. Nora set the file on the coffee table. She took a sip of the scotch. It was smoky and rich, burning a warm path down to her stomach. She looked at Gabriel. The harsh lines of his face were softened by the firelight. For the past 3 months, they had existed in a strange, intimate orbit. They were partners in violence, architects of a criminal enterprise. But there was a line they hadn't crossed, a boundary forged by the trauma of her past and the lethal nature of his present. Gabriel reached out and took the glass from her hand, setting it next to hers on the table. He turned toward her. You've rebuilt my entire logistics network, Gabriel murmured, his dark eyes searching hers. You've made me richer. You've made me stronger. But you hardly ever sleep, Nora. You're always working. What are you running from? I'm not running, she whispered. I'm building a wall so high and so thick that nobody can ever hurt me again. Gabriel raised his hand. He cupped her cheek. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence she knew his hands were capable of. Nobody is going to hurt you. I gave you my word on the pavement. I keep my word. Nora leaned into his palm. The cynical hardened shell she wore for the captains cracked just a fraction. I know. Gabriel leaned in. His lips brushed against hers. It wasn't a demanding kiss. It was an inquiry, a question asked in the quiet space between them. Nora closed her eyes. She reached up, twisting her fingers into the soft fabric of his shirt, and pulled him closer. The kiss deepened. It was a collision of shared darkness, a fierce, desperate clinging to the only other person in the world who understood the exact cost of survival. Gabriel's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. For the first time in her life, Nora didn't feel trapped. She felt anchored. Then the window shattered. The sound was explosive. A high-caliber bullet tore through the reinforced glass, shredding the heavy velvet curtains and burying itself into the plaster wall directly above the sofa. Gabriel reacted with terrifying speed. He didn't look. He didn't hesitate. He tackled Nora to the floor, shielding her body with his own, as a second bullet tore through the room, shattering the crystal decanters on the far wall. The smell of spilled scotch and pulverized drywall filled the air. "Stay down!" Gabriel roared. He rolled off her, drawing the heavy pistol he always kept holstered at the small of his back. He crawled toward the desk to hit the perimeter alarm, but a third shot ripped through the darkness outside. Gabriel grunted a sharp, guttural sound of pain. He collapsed against the side of the mahogany desk. "Gabriel!" Nora scrambled across the rug. Glass bit into her palms, but she ignored it. She reached him in seconds. He was breathing heavily, his teeth gritted. He clutched his left shoulder. Dark blood was already seeping through the fingers of his right hand, soaking the grey fabric of his shirt. "Sniper," Gabriel gritted out. "Tree line, about 200 yards. The alarms finally triggered a deafening siren echoing through the estate. Footsteps pounded in the hallway. Leo kicked the library door open, an assault rifle raised, scanning the room frantically. "Lights out!" Nora screamed at him over the siren. Leo hit the switch. The room plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the flickering orange glow of the fireplace. "Boss is hit," Leo barked, moving low to the ground toward the shattered window. "Perimeter guards are engaging." Nora didn't panic. The adrenaline didn't paralyze her. It sharpened her into a blade. She pressed her hands over Gabriel's, applying hard, agonizing pressure to the gunshot wound. He let out a sharp hiss. "Look at me." Nora ordered her face inches from his in the dark. "Gabriel, look at me." His dark eyes snapped to hers. They were clouded with pain, but the focus was still there. "It went clean through," Nora said, her voice entirely steady. She could feel the exit wound against the wood of the desk. "It missed the artery. You're going to be fine." "The Russians?" Gabriel breathed, his grip on his gun tightening. "Alexei retaliated. If it was Alexei, he's a dead man," Nora said coldly. She didn't let go of the wound. She looked over her shoulder at Leo. "Call Dr. Orris. Tell him to get to the safe room downstairs. Then take a team into those woods and bring me whoever pulled that trigger. Bring him alive." Leo hesitated for a fraction of a second. He was used to taking orders from Gabriel, not the woman pressing her bare, bloody hands against his boss's shoulder. Gabriel coughed a weak, wet sound. "Do exactly what my wife says." Leo nodded sharply and vanished back into the hallway. Nora looked back down at Gabriel. His blood was warm on her skin. He reached up with his uninjured hand, his fingers tracing the silver scar on her eyebrow. He smiled a dark, feral expression. "You aren't scared," Gabriel whispered. "I've bled on the pavement," Nora replied, her eyes burning with cold fire. "I'm not doing it again, and neither are you." She grabbed him by his good arm, her muscles straining. "Get up. We're going to the basement." She hauled him to his feet. She took his weight just as he had taken hers in the alley months ago. She wrapped her arm around his waist, practically carrying him out of the ruined library. They walked through the blood, through the shattered glass, moving into the depths of the fortress. Nora didn't look back. She had just survived her first assassination attempt, and all she felt was a terrifying, absolute certainty. She was the queen now, and queens did not bleed quietly. The safe room was a concrete vault buried 3 stories beneath the manor. The air tasted of recycled oxygen, iodine and copper. Nora stood by the deep stainless steel sink, watching the water turn pale pink as she scrubbed Gabriel's blood from under her fingernails. She scrubbed until her skin was raw. Across the room, Dr. Aris dropped a deformed piece of lead into a metal basin. Clink. "Clean exit," Aris muttered, his brow slick with sweat as he packed the shoulder wound with thick gauze. Gabriel sat shirtless on the edge of the medical cot. He was pale, his breathing shallow, but his jaw was locked tight. He refused the morphine. He watched Nora. He didn't look at his bleeding shoulder or the doctor stitching his flesh. His dark eyes remained fixed entirely on her. "I need a shirt," Gabriel rasped. "You need to lie down before you bleed out," Aris corrected, tying off a suture. The heavy steel door hissed open, the vacuum seal breaking. Leo stepped in. His knuckles were bruised, his suit jacket missing, and his tie ripped away. He was breathing hard. "We got him," Leo said, looking at Gabriel. "He didn't make it to the tree line. He's in the soundproof holding room down the hall. A local freelancer. He won't talk." Nora turned off the faucet. She dried her hands on a coarse white towel. She didn't say a word. She dropped the towel onto the counter, walked past Leo, and stepped out into the sterile corridor. Gabriel tried to stand a sharp grunt, escaping his lips, but Leo held up a hand, stepping back to block the doorway. "Let her work, boss," Leo said softly. Nora entered the holding cell. It was a bleak, windowless cube. The sniper was strapped tightly to a heavy iron chair bolted to the floor. He was young, maybe 30, bleeding heavily from a broken nose. He looked up at Nora and sneered, expecting a violent interrogation. Nora didn't yell. She didn't reach for the pliers sitting on the metal cart. She walked over to the table where Leo had dumped the contents of the man's pockets. A burner phone, a crushed pack of cigarettes, a set of keys. She picked up the keys. Attached to the ring was a heavy brass fob etched with the logo of an exclusive downtown cigar lounge, the exact lounge Victor practically lived in. Nora pocketed the keys. She turned to the bleeding man. "You aren't Russian," Nora said, her voice eerily calm. "Alexei wouldn't hire a sloppy freelancer for a revenge hit. He would send one of his own blood to make a statement. You're a local. You get paid in cash, probably routed through a shell company tied to the downtown rackets." The man spat a glob of blood onto the concrete. "Go to hell, sweetheart." Nora stepped closer. "You missed the kill shot tonight because the glass in the library is ballistic. It deflected your trajectory by 2 inches. You didn't know the glass was rated. Victor never spent time in the library. He didn't know the architectural specs. Only a captain who felt his territory slipping away would try to frame the Bratva to eliminate Gabriel and take back the southern docks in the chaos." The sniper's sneer vanished. His silence was all the confirmation she needed. Nora walked back to the medical bay. Gabriel was wearing a fresh black shirt, his left arm immobilized in a sling. He looked at her face, reading the cold calculation in her eyes. "Victor," Nora said. Gabriel didn't look surprised. He just looked dangerous. "He saw me hand you the keys to the kingdom. He thought if he removed me, he could easily dispose of you." "He's coming here right now," Leo interrupted, pressing an earpiece deeper into his ear. "Victor just cleared the main gate. He heard the perimeter sirens. He's coming down to confirm the kill." "Let him in," Nora commanded. 10 minutes later, the steel door to the bunker slid open. Victor hurried inside, his face perfectly sculpted into an expression of frantic concern. He stopped dead in his tracks. Gabriel was sitting upright, very much alive. Nora stood in the center of the room. Leo quietly stepped behind Victor, blocking the exit. "Boss?" Victor stammered, his eyes darting wildly between the three of them. "I heard the chatter on the scanners. Are you all right? We need to mobilize. The Russians—" Nora reached into her pocket. She tossed the brass keychain onto the metal floor. It clattered loudly, sliding across the concrete until it rested against the toe of Victor's expensive leather shoe. Victor looked down. All the color drained from his face in an instant. "The Russians didn't pull the trigger, Victor," Nora said. Her voice was ice. "Your lack of attention to detail did. You underestimated the armor on the house, and you underestimated me." Victor panicked. He reached for the gun tucked inside his jacket. He didn't even clear the leather holster. Leo drew his weapon and fired a single, deafening shot. The bullet shattered Victor's kneecap. Victor screamed, collapsing onto the concrete, clutching his ruined leg. He writhed on the floor, smearing dark crimson across the sterile grey tiles. Nora walked over to him. She looked down at the pathetic, agonizing frame of the man who had tried to put her back on the pavement. Gregory used violence to break her spirit. Nora realized in that moment she could use violence to protect her empire. The difference was absolute. She reached to the small of her back and pulled the compact 9mm Gabriel had given her 2 weeks ago. She racked the slide. The metallic click echoed sharply off the concrete walls. Gabriel stood up from the cot. He didn't stop her. He watched a dark, consuming pride burning in his eyes. "You don't get to run things, Victor," Nora said softly, aiming the barrel directly at his chest. "You just get to die." She pulled the trigger. The gunshot rang out, brutal and final. Nora didn't flinch. The recoil jolted her arm, but her feet remained firmly planted. Victor went completely still. The heavy, ringing silence returned, filled only by the smell of burnt cordite. Nora lowered the gun. She turned around to face Gabriel. He walked toward her, favoring his uninjured side. He stopped inches away. He reached out with his right hand, taking the gun from her grip and setting it on the table. Then he cupped the back of her neck, pulling her forehead against his. "No one will ever touch you," Gabriel whispered fiercely. "You are untouchable. You are mine." "I am yours," Nora replied, her voice unyielding. "And this city is ours." She had bled in the gutter, but the rain was gone. She was the queen of the underworld, and her reign had just begun. Nora went from bleeding on the asphalt to pulling the trigger on a mutinous empire. She didn't just survive the underworld, she conquered it. If you loved watching Nora tear down the men who underestimated her and build her own throne alongside Gabriel, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who loves a truly dark, unapologetic revenge arc. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have plenty more gritty, intense stories coming your way. The streets never sleep, and neither do we. See you in the next one.